G'day legends, my name's Blake and I'd like to welcome you to the first video of this channel in a while. Today I'm going to introduce you to a character within my Dungeons & Dragons campaign as I paint them, getting them tabletop ready for an upcoming session. Now the idea for this video isn't to really go into any depth about any painting techniques or really much about how I painted this mini at all, as I'm a very okay painter and you should probably go look at some other people's content for that honestly. Instead, I thought we'd talk a bit about this character, who they are, what they've done, where they've been, and how they're going to tie into my D&D campaign. Now also, I'm real new to all this, so it's probably going to be a bit janky, but I hope you enjoy hearing about this character and you find the time lapse at least a bit satisfying, as you'll see the mini go from a puddle of resin to a battle-ready tool of destruction that I will use to strike fear into the hearts of my players, or something like that. If you have any genuine feedback though, I'd love to hear it. So please leave a comment and also feel free to draw inspiration from this or just outright take this character for your own use. Though if you do so, I'd also love to hear that. And last thing, if you'd like to get this model for yourself, you can get it from Parasite Collectibles under the name Valog Undying King. I found it on my mini factory and I'll make sure to include a link to it in the description. So, almost 3,000 years ago, a group of forsaken magicians called the Sorcerer Kings worked in the shadows, gathering strength from dark and forbidden places. They would come into contact with agents of the Black Witch, an ancient enemy of the Light Giver, who was the God King that ruled their world. And these Sorcerer Kings would draw power from the Veil, which was the domain of the Black Witch. Now, the Sorcerer Kings believed they had seen through the lies of the Light Giver, that the stories of his holy wards had been falsehoods and were used to cover up what had plainly been his successful attempt to take control of the world they lived in, called Valethria. Many of the Sorcerer Kings had been burned by misfortune in this world, as there was a great divide between those that were descendants of the Light Giver's first followers and those that hadn't been. These two groups were called the Risen and the Lightless, and I'm sure you can figure out which is which. But the character we're going to focus on today isn't one of the unfortunate Lightless that was looking for revenge. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the story of a risen man that saw injustices in the world around him, and instead of accepting them as most risen did, he would question them and challenge them. And it was these questions that would lead him down a path that led to darkness, heartbreak, and eventually, proud sacrifice. And so, in the country of Terralin, which was more commonly referred to as the Verdant Wilds, Orlenn Velsera was born into the most influential and powerful family of the jungle-filled country. While the country was overseen by one of the 5 radiant gods that reported directly to the Light Giver, the Velsera noble house held much influence among the people, being a risen household that had produced many powerful druids, paladins, and other such individuals. Now, being the firstborn in this household, Orlenn wasn't heir to the lordship. That instead would go to the secondborn, his younger sister. Instead, as tradition dictated, as the firstborn, Orlenn would be dedicated to the temple, learning to serve the gods in whatever way possible, so that he and the Velsera family may express their gratitude to the Light Giver for the peaceful world that they lived in. And over time he would find himself following a very traditional path, growing tall and broad with a thick mane of green hair and glowing yellow eyes being the mark of the Velsera house, and as luck would have it, he would apprentice as a paladin beneath his aunt, who had been the firstborn of her generation. And together, they would patrol the verdant wilds, keeping threats such as the Covenant of Dread, which were blood magic wielding worshippers of the old Chaos gods, at bay. But, as Orlenn approached the end of his apprenticeship, a new threat began to emerge as Forsaken became more and more frequent. Forsaken were individuals who had turned their back on the light and had broken divine law. These could have been lightless who were found in possession of magical items or abilities, or, even worse, risen who had committed horrible acts of blasphemy. And as Orlenn's final trial as an apprentice, a task would be assigned to him that would require him to find a hidden enclave of Forsaken and exterminate the heathens. But upon arriving at the house that supposedly was the hideout of these heathens, he found nothing more than a family of lightless furbolgs, cowering before him. And it was in this moment he began to question what he was doing. It was well known that innately magical beings such as furbolgs were the typical perpetrators of divine law. After all, they were born lightless, but with the ability to use magic, so it was much more accessible to them. But as he stood there in his full plate armor, his glowing great sword in hand, none of the furbolgs fought back against him, and certainly none used any magic. And so instead of killing them as he had been ordered, he let them live and returned to the temple he served at, where he would meet with his aunt. Proud of his decision, he told her he had seen through the trial and realized its true purpose, and that he had let the family live. But instead of pride lighting up her face as he had expected, she flashed with rage as she slapped him so hard he fell to a knee, and as he looked up, he saw disappointment and disgust upon her face. He had failed his trial, and was not permitted to finish his apprenticeship, as he clearly still had so much to learn. But from this point forward, Orlenn was conflicted, and every time they would fight, capture, or kill a threat, he would wonder if the threat was truly that, or if it was just someone who had been born less fortunate than him. A few more years would pass and still he wouldn't be allowed to progress further than an apprentice, but some never did. He certainly became more skilled as a fighter and more capable as a paladin, but in the eyes of the Order and his aunt, he would never be strong enough. And so one day would come where he and his aunt would find themselves in a small village during a raid by the Covenant of Dread. And during this raid, a critical moment would come where the otherworldly monsters would break through the defenses and surge into the village. Orlenn's aunt immediately would rush to the homes of the risen within the village, but Orlenn would hesitate as he heard a quick scream of a child nearby. Quickly, he focused in on where the scream had come from, and hiding behind one of the houses was a person like he had never seen before. An Eladrin. Now, since his encounter with the Furbolgs a few years prior, he had done much research into other innately magical beings, and he had heard of the Eladrin, strange elves who had some kind of magical connection to the seasons. And so when he found this Eladrin mother who clutched her infant son to her chest, fear ran through his mind. But before he could think, his aunt had already grabbed him by the armor, intending on taking him to protect the Risen. But her priorities quickly shifted, as she told him to back away while she dealt with the animals that he had found. As she began to draw her great hammer back in a swing towards the mother and child, Orlenn fought back against her. No longer would he stand idly by when another family of victims was created, just because they were born outside the light. And as the two clashed, he demonstrated just how skilled he had become, keeping up with his aunt, until monsters from the Covenant of Dread descended upon them. Orlenn was lucky enough that they targeted his aunt first, and this allowed him to take the pair of Eladrin into the surrounding dense jungle, as he heard the screams of the Risen and his aunt coming from within the village. He would then follow a path that led him and the Eladrin mother and son across the world of Valethria, to find them as safe a home as possible, and they found that with a budding organization called the Sorcerer Kings. From this point, Orlenn would join them, and he would find a following within the Order, as while many were capable spellcasters with no interest in his martial abilities, there were a select few who thought to combine their magic with physical might, and all within the Order shared Orlenn's passion for seeking the truth, even though it may be difficult. From here, they formed a secretive order of knights within the Sorcerer Kings, and they were called the Shadow Knights. They would combine their physical prowess and skill with the dark magics that came from beyond the veil, magic that was not tied to the Light Giver, who they called the Deceiver. And over a few dozen years, they grew in strength and number, preparing for when they would bring about the end of this era of the Light Giver. And as that moment came, Orlenn would be right on the battlefield, fighting against an order of powerful and radiant knights called the Sunspears. With the Sunspears covered in their golden armor and weapons alight with green energy, and the Shadow Knights blinking between physical and ethereal forms, They would stage an epic battle in the Radiant Kingdom as the most powerful of the Sorcerer Kings attempted a ritual that sought to allow the Black Witch access to this world. But as the veil began to take hold in this world, a great explosion of dark magic rippled across the landscape as the goddess of this country, the Empress of Light, foiled their efforts. And during this explosion, all on the battlefield briefly fell into their own visions, the strange and anxious energy of that other world showing people dark truths about their lives. Orlenn saw a brief story of the Furbolg people. It showed them once as great warriors of the Vale, as long, long ago they followed the Black Witch into the darkness of her new realm, and they were forever changed by living there for so long. But then the Light Giver would come along, and they formed an alliance with the Black Witch, and right at their moment of triumph over the Chaos Gods, he would betray her and trap her great warriors, the Furbolgs, in Valethria. He would curse them into the docile people they were today and blocked their connection to the dark magic that was their birthright. And this magic that was once the Furbolgs was the same kind of magic that the Shadow Knights employed in their rituals. It granted them abilities, it strengthened their resolve, and it allowed them to see through the lies that the world presented to them. But it was never truly theirs to wield. As all awoke from their unique visions upon the battlefield, many Sorcerer Kings ran, realizing that the day was lost, and so they tried to escape into the Vale where they could be free of the Lightgiver. But Orlenn was overwhelmed by the one core value that had never led him astray: his honor. Now knowing the history of the Furbolgs, he also escaped the battlefield, but he returned to where his order's primary stronghold lay, hidden deep within a canyon, far from where the light may shine upon them. And as his final action, he performed a ritual only known to the High Knight of the Order, and he sealed their ritual pools off, only allowing them to be opened by one of Furbolg descent, should one ever be fortunate enough to escape the unforgiving grasp of the Deceiver. But the price was steep for Orlenn, for upon completion of the ritual his soul would be tied to it until a day came that one could indeed break the seal. And so to this day, almost 3,000 years later, his soul waits for one to break the seal. But the body he left behind, the miniature you see before you, remains, and it has been reanimated by a lich that now resides within this dark underground fortress that my D&D party is exploring. But I think we'll reserve the story of the lich for another video and another miniature. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that. It's been a good time chucking this all together, and I can definitely see myself doing a bit more of this. The model I printed is a little dodgy, and I didn't do a fantastic job of cleaning the supports and stuff off it, but overall, I had a really good time putting it together and trying out a few new things. I know there's room for improvement, but let me know if you like the lightning sword. It's the first time I've ever tried that. And also, I'm not aiming for perfection or anything. I'm just looking to have a good time and make something that my players are going to love to see on the table this weekend. Again, let me know if you liked this or if you have any tips or anything, but with all that said, I'll catch you next time, legends.